The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as James Winters stepped up to the defense table, his back a little too straight for someone carrying the invisible weight of 3 tours in Afghanistan. At 42, he looked older than his years, gray threading through his short hair, dark circles under his eyes betraying years of sleepless nights. But what made him stand out wasn't the scars on his leg or the slight limp. It was the unwavering resolve in his expression, even as he stood before one of the toughest judges in the county. James had been arrested for trespassing, charged with disturbing the peace outside a senator's home. But this wasn't just any protest. The senator had publicly pledged support for a veteran health care bill that would have funded specialized PTSD treatment in their county. At the last minute, he'd reversed his vote without explanation. James, who had seen 4 of his fellow veterans take their own lives in the past year, simply wanted to ask why. His protest had been silent, peaceful, and conducted from a public sidewalk holding a sign that read, "Keep your promise. Veterans are dying." But Judge Richard Hamilton wasn't interested in context. Known for his zero-tolerance approach and rumored to have dodged the draft in his youth, the judge barely let James's attorney speak before cutting her off. "Everyone's got problems," he scoffed. "This court isn't a therapy clinic." When James's voice cracking shared that he'd lost close friends to suicide and was speaking out for those who never came home, the judge leaned back and laughed, a cold, dismissive sound that echoed off the high wooden walls. "Save the drama for Veterans Day," Judge Hamilton said, waving a hand. "This is a courtroom, not a parade." The gallery fell silent. Even the bailiff looked away. In that moment, the weight of the judge's words didn't just land on James, it hit everyone watching. A decorated veteran had come not for pity, but for accountability. And instead of justice, he was met with mockery. What no one knew, what even James didn't know, was that someone was about to walk through those doors and shift the course of that courtroom and his life forever. Just when it seemed the courtroom had turned its back on James Winters, the veteran stood silent and humiliated before a judge who refused to see beyond a criminal charge. The sting of Judge Hamilton's laughter still echoed in the minds of everyone seated, and the once faint whispers of discomfort had hardened into an oppressive silence. James's court-appointed lawyer, Sarah Chen, stood beside him with clenched fists. She had only known her client for a short time, but the injustice unfolding in that room was unbearable. "Your Honor," Sarah said, her voice firm before sentencing, "I'd like to call a character witness, someone who can speak to Mr. Winters' service and the man he's been since returning home." Judge Hamilton sighed, clearly unimpressed. "Fine. 5 minutes." "No more." Without another word, Sarah moved quickly to the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom. She nodded once, and a tall man in full-dress uniform stepped into view. The room collectively gasped. Colonel James Harrington entered with the quiet authority of a man who had commanded battlefields. His dark blue jacket bore rows of ribbons, and his left leg, now a visible prosthetic, clanked softly with each step toward the witness stand. The moment was electric. James's eyes widened. He hadn't seen his former commanding officer since Ramadi 2016. Back then, it had been chaos, smoke, bloodfire. Harrington had nearly died that day, and James had been the one who dragged him from a burning vehicle while under enemy fire. After taking the oath, Colonel Harrington began. "Staff Sergeant James Winters served under my command during 2 tours in Afghanistan. On April 17, 2016, our convoy hit an IED. 3 men died instantly. I was trapped inside the lead vehicle, unconscious and pinned. Winters, though injured, ran through open fire to get to me. He pulled me out moments before the vehicle exploded and then carried me nearly half a mile to the medevac point. I lost a leg that day, but I'm alive because of that man." A hush fell over the courtroom as Harrington turned to James. "You saved my life, Sergeant. You never once boasted about it. In fact, you disappeared from public view like most heroes do." Judge Hamilton tried to interject, but Harrington continued. "Since returning home, James has led a weekly peer support group for local veterans, funded entirely from his own disability checks. He's helped dozens navigate PTSD, job loss, and even suicide prevention. When the local VA office was overwhelmed last winter, James volunteered 40 hours a week to help process claims. He didn't ask for credit, he just showed up." Sarah stepped forward again and handed a folder to the bailiff. "Your Honor, here are statements from over 20 veterans who credit Mr. Winters with saving their lives not on the battlefield, but right here in this community. Judge Hamilton took the folder but didn't open it. In the military, Colonel Harrington said, locking eyes with the judge, "We teach that leadership is earned through action, not title. Mr. Winters earned our respect with blood, sweat, and compassion. What's happening in this courtroom? This man being treated like a criminal for holding a sign. It dishonors not just his sacrifice, but the system we all swore to protect." For the first time since court began, Judge Hamilton had no retort. The courtroom felt different now, charged, transformed. The man who had been mocked moments ago was now being seen for who he truly was: a soldier, a leader, a protector. Respect began to replace judgment, and shame hung heavy in the silence. And in the back row, people began to rise. The tension in the courtroom was thick enough to cut with a knife. After Colonel James Harrington's riveting testimony, the room sat in stunned silence. Every eye was now on James Winters, the man who had once been mocked as a criminal, but now stood under the weight of long overdue recognition. Even Judge Richard Hamilton, who had scoffed at James's tears just moments earlier, seemed rattled by the colonel's words. But the moment that truly shifted the earth beneath everyone's feet was still to come. The courtroom doors creaked open again, and all heads turned. Slowly, a wheelchair rolled forward, pushed by a middle-aged woman with a calm but firm expression. In the chair sat an elderly man wearing a cap adorned with the World War II pins and the unmistakable eagle insignia of a retired major general. The whispers in the gallery rose to an audible hum. Sarah Chen, standing beside James, drew a sharp breath. "Oh my God," she whispered. "That's Major General Robert Hamilton." The judge paled. The woman pushing the chair spoke up, her voice clear and respectful. "Your Honor, my father, retired Major General Robert Hamilton, has asked to speak." Judge Hamilton visibly tensed. "Father, this is highly irregular," he began, his gavel already in hand. "We're in the middle of proceedings." But the Major General's voice cut through the room, frail yet commanding. "Richard, I raised you better than this." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. The gallery froze as if caught in the middle of a breath. Judge Hamilton looked as though he'd been struck. "When I fought in Normandy," the general continued, "I wasn't fighting so that a courtroom in America would mock a man for weeping over the lives of his brothers in arms. And I certainly didn't raise a son who would laugh in the face of pain worn so plainly by a veteran." Hamilton's hand shook slightly. "Father, you don't understand." "I understand right and wrong," the general interrupted sharply. "And I understand loyalty. This young man," he gestured to James, "showed loyalty to his comrades, to his country, and to the people this nation often forgets. Where is your loyalty, Richard?" The judge had no answer. Colonel Harrington stood once more. "Your Honor, may I speak plainly?" he asked. Judge Hamilton gave a small, silent nod. "No one here is asking that the law be ignored," Harrington said. "We're asking that context matter. James Winters didn't vandalize property or threaten anyone. He stood on a public sidewalk with a sign asking for answers about a promise made and broken. He acted out of desperation, not malice." As if on cue, the doors at the back of the courtroom opened again. A wave of people entered, veterans young and old, some walking with canes, others in wheelchairs, and several with visible prosthetics. They moved in quiet formation, filling the pews at the rear of the courtroom. Each wore the same black t-shirt with bold white letters, "Veterans Stand Together." The effect was immediate. Even the bailiff hesitated as the group filed in. Judge Hamilton rose slightly from his bench, his jaw twitching with uncertainty. "What is the meaning of this?" he asked, though his voice lacked its usual bite. Sarah quickly stepped forward. "Your Honor, these individuals are not disrupting court. They're simply exercising their right to observe a public hearing. They've come in peaceful support of Mr. Winters." One more figure stepped through the open doors, a young man in uniform carrying an American flag folded into a tight triangle. He placed it gently on the bench behind James. Silence hung heavy again, but it was a different silence now, not of fear or uncertainty, but of reverence. Judge Hamilton looked out at the crowd, then down at his father still seated near the front. "I've spent my life interpreting the law," the judge said slowly. "But today I've been reminded that justice is more than statutes and sentencing guidelines. It's about humanity and accountability." His eyes met James Winters's, then Colonel Harrington's, and finally his father's. "You taught me that," he said softly. The Major General nodded, his expression softening. "I am calling a brief recess," the judge continued, voice thick with emotion. "When we return, I will render a decision that reflects not only the law, but the full weight of what this man has done for his fellow Americans." As he struck the gavel once more, it no longer sounded like punishment, but like a reckoning. And in that moment, the courtroom ceased to be a place of judgment. It became a sanctuary of truth, filled with the ghosts of battlefields and the living proof that brotherhood never ends. And for the first time in his life, Judge Richard Hamilton truly understood what service looked like, not in medals, not in court documents, but in the quiet strength of a veteran who never gave up. For a long moment after Major General Robert Hamilton's rebuke, the Jefferson County courtroom sat in stunned silence. Judge Richard Hamilton looked as if the very bench beneath him had cracked. The air was heavy with unspoken truths, and the presence of the aging war hero, his own father, had shifted the weight of justice back toward balance. James Winters, standing beside his attorney, Sarah Chen, felt his chest rise with something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. When Judge Hamilton returned from recess, his demeanor was transformed. Gone was the smug, dismissive figure who had laughed at a veteran's tears. In his place stood a man clearly wrestling with a courtroom that had become more than a legal arena. It was now a reckoning hall for values long ignored. "I've reviewed the testimony," the judge began, his voice quieter than before, almost contrite. "And while the law does not permit me to ignore the facts of the case, it does allow me discretion in sentencing." James stood still, bracing himself for anything. "Mr. Winters," Judge Hamilton continued, "you were found on private property. That is by law trespassing. However, given the full context, the nature of your protest, your military service, your ongoing contributions to the veteran community, and the compelling testimony offered, I am sentencing you to 6 months of probation with no jail time." A wave of relief swept through the courtroom, followed closely by a ripple of applause. The judge raised his hand, gently signaling for quiet, but not with his earlier sharpness. His eyes drifted toward the back of the courtroom, where his father, still seated in his wheelchair, watched with quiet intensity. Furthermore, the judge said, "Your required community service will be fulfilled by expanding your current veteran support group. That work is vital and deserves our full support." Sarah Chen allowed herself the faintest smile. Judge Hamilton wasn't finished. "In addition," he said, pausing to glance down at his notes, "I am personally donating $10,000 to help secure a permanent space for that support group. And I strongly encourage others in our community, especially those in positions of influence, to contribute and get involved." Another round of soft applause filled the room. What had started as a trial was quickly becoming a community-wide moment of transformation. The judge looked directly at the court reporter and continued, "I also recommend that Senator Davis meet with Mr. Winters and a delegation of veterans to revisit the Veterans Healthcare Funding Bill that was previously struck down. It is this court's view that such conversations, though outside legal mandate, are critical to rebuilding trust with those who have served." The impact of his words was immediate. One of the reporters in the gallery stood up quietly and began texting rapidly. Another nodded to a photographer who snapped a shot of James, still stunned by the decision, standing beside Sarah, his hands trembling, but this time from gratitude. Choked up, James turned to Sarah. "Did that just happen?" She nodded, smiling through tears. "It did." Judge Hamilton took a deep breath, his expression softening in a way no one had ever seen in that room. "Mr. Winters," he said finally, "you taught me something in this courtroom that no legal textbook ever could. Thank you for your service and for reminding this court that the law should never be divorced from humanity." With that, he struck the gavel once gently. The courtroom erupted. Veterans in the gallery stood in solidarity. Some saluted, others simply bowed their heads in respect. Chad the bailiff turned away for a moment, clearly overwhelmed. Major General Hamilton nodded with quiet approval, his frail frame carrying the weight of conviction. For the first time, the people in that room weren't just hearing justice, they were witnessing it. As James exited the courtroom, Colonel Harrington joined him. "You stood tall today," he said. "Just like you did that day on Route, Michigan." James shook his head. "I didn't do it alone." No, Harrington agreed. "But you reminded them what leadership really looks like." The press swarmed James outside, but he didn't stop for long. He had a group to lead, a community to rebuild, a promise to keep. And thanks to a courtroom that had been shaken to its core, he finally had the support to do it. What began as a quiet court hearing in Jefferson County became a story that reverberated across the nation. Michael Winters, once a trembling veteran on trial for trespassing, was now the face of a national conversation. His courtroom stand backed by powerful testimony, and his unwavering honesty ignited a movement that no one could have predicted. Within days, news outlets from coast to coast shared the moment when Judge Hamilton's own father, a retired major general, publicly rebuked his son in defense of a fellow soldier. The footage of veterans filling the courtroom in solidarity and the judge's surprising reversal struck a deep chord. Americans who had long overlooked the silent battles of returning service members suddenly began paying attention. Under immense public pressure, Senator Davis reintroduced the Veterans Health Care Bill this time, with expanded provisions and bipartisan support. The bill passed swiftly, and within 6 months, construction began on a new PTSD treatment center. Michael stood at the ribbon cutting, flanked by Colonel Harrington and Sarah Chen, his young defender turned close friend. Judge Hamilton, changed by the experience, established one of the first veterans treatment courts in the state, offering compassionate rehabilitative options for veterans facing legal trouble due to service-related trauma. His courtroom became a model of justice grounded in understanding and respect. Meanwhile, Michael found renewed purpose. No longer defined by the shadows of war, he led the Veterans Support Group full-time, helping others find their footing after service. Veterans who once felt forgotten now found hope, community, and a powerful voice in the man who refused to be silent. Sometimes all it takes is one voice to spark a revolution, not through anger or blame, but through truth, compassion, and courage. Michael Winters reminded us that real change doesn't come from silence. It comes from standing up even when your knees shake. His journey is proof that no one is ever truly alone when others have the strength to rise beside them. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment below and share your thoughts. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories that remind us of the strength and spirit of everyday heroes. Let's keep these voices alive, because together we can change the world.